Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hey, Pete. Hey, Paul.
How you doing,
How you
lads?
doing? Hey
Fan-
Paul, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yesterday,
Thank you very
right?
much. Yesterday, yes.
Oh, dear.
Yes. It was interesting to turn the age I turned, which shall not be mentioned, but I had a nice evening with my wife. Yeah, it was nice. Lots of nice messages from students and friends. More students than friends, and definitely more friends than family. So that was interesting.
Right.
But all good. How are you guys doing? What sort of writing have you been encountering or helping with lately?
Oh, that's a good question. Always quite varied for me. I've been doing some writing and editing for my fiction anthology book that I'm working on, and a lot of blogs, really. A lot of content writers I'm working with, dealing with like scientific blogs, medical blogs, and yeah, other more marketing based stuff. I think
That's
that's
interesting.
it from me. What about you, Pete?
I have a student who writes about disinformation. He's a fact checker. So that's been very interesting reading his articles.
Lovely.
We have a couple of
Very
people
cool.
in the chat. We have Gustavo. Hey, Gustavo. Thanks for joining us. And also we have Tania. Hi, Tania.
Great.
Good to see you.
Thanks for joining us, folks.
Yeah,
And
hope
where are you
can
watching
hear us
from?
okay.
Say again?
Yeah, Tanya said it would be great if we could speak louder. I hope
Yeah.
people can hear us. If you want to write in the chat who is quiet for you, then
That would be useful.
maybe we can sort that one out. Yeah, but what was your what writing were you checking, Paul, this week?
I've been working with several students, but one of them really stands out to me. She's improved drastically in just the last 2 months we've been working together. And she's originally from China, but she had come to Canada for university, graduated from university, and now she's in the process of taking these English proficiency exams to qualify for immigration. And, you know, she had basically good writing, but I would say in the last 2 months, she's really escalated it. She's really become a great writer. She's mastering structure and organization of her ideas so much better. And I'm actually kind of stunned, not more than impressed. I don't know how to describe that, but yeah, she's done really well. So, from Somalia, welcome.
Oh, hello, Ali. Good to see you here.
So I've been seeing
That's
a lot
awesome,
of
Paul, yeah.
essays and things like that are sort of for these proficiency exams. They have to write these sort of imaginary survey opinions. You get offered two choices, and you have to create a scenario and then argue your opinion about the scenario. So it's actually a creative writing endeavor as well, because they have to imagine the reality of the scenario and then argue for it. Like, your city is interviewing you about what it should do with the empty land next to the school. Well, you have to imagine the scenario before you can argue either choice. So it's been very interesting to see that.
All right, we have Tanya's from Germany. All right, good to get someone from Germany.
Yeah,
great. And yeah, if you could, if you're watching this, if you could just put like so we can try to reach more people, that would be fantastic. Guys, what is the topic for today's event?
Well, I guess we should kick off with an official introduction. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Paul, and along with my co-hosts and fellow writing coaches, Pete Posner and Phil Charter, we'd like to welcome you to this special live event that kicks off our second season of the Trouble with Writing podcast. Today we're calling this English Errors That Will Crush Your Credibility. Now, before we get really into this topic, guys, I'm wondering if we should address the topic of what is credibility in writing, and why is it so essential to have strong credibility? What do you think, guys? Any
That
ideas, thoughts?
deep.
Do you want to go, Phil?
I haven't thought about this at all, so this is off the top of my head. But I feel like credibility is what you get when people offer their attention and the ability for you to convey the purpose of your writing. So if you don't have that credibility, people aren't paying attention to your messages, they're not taking them seriously, they're not really listening and allowing you to try and get your purpose across. That's how I'd see it.
So building on that, why do errors, grammar errors, why do they spoil your credibility? So building on what Phil says, one of the problems is that when you have errors in your writing, on the one hand, it can affect your clarity, right? And clarity is like the number one thing you need. But it doesn't only affect clarity, right? I mean, some errors hardly affect clarity at all. But what they definitely do is they distract readers, right? So if we think about, when someone is reading your work, they have expectations, right? So they see you as an authority on your subject matter, and they expect a certain standard of quality. Okay. So the problem is when you have errors, it affects, as well as your clarity, it definitely affects always your presentation. Okay. So they can make you look less professional, right? If you look less professional, then people start to doubt. Also, do you also know what you're talking about, right? Which is what we're talking about when we say credibility. So I always think of when I'm watching the news. Sometimes I watch national news, and I actually sometimes see like little mistakes in captions on news programs, and that actually irritates me. So it's like it distracts me. I'm like, what's that? So instead of listening to what the news broadcasters saying, their message, I start to get distracted and, hey, why that's a spelling mistake. You can't have a spelling mistake there. Things like this. Of course, spelling mistakes very often don't affect clarity, but they definitely affect credibility. Right? They distract you, they spoil your presentation, they make you look less professional. So that's what I would say about why you need to avoid errors to keep your credibility.
That's really interesting, Pete. Just before Paul weighs in with his opinion, I just wanted to say credibility, professionalism, authority, these kind of words that we talk about with writing, they're subjective. They're not a hard line of like, you are credible or you are not credible. And that is the challenge that we all have as writers. And I think the extra challenge that multilingual writers have is, there's an even higher barrier to credibility because of some language issues. So yeah, hopefully that's what we're going to talk about more today. Yeah. Over to you, Paul. What do you think about this question?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you've both said so far. In the specific genre I work in, academic essay writing, there's a layer in there where a lack of credibility also triggers bias. For example, if a professor, remember you're writing for a teacher, a professor, an academy, or a peer group, and if they see errors, even especially simple errors, or errors common to a certain language group, it can trigger their bias towards that language group or culture, or the fact that you're a student and you're not taking your discipline seriously. Now, these are unfortunate, but they're a reality. And I think that, if I were a professor and someone submitted a paper to me, it was full of sloppy errors, I would just think, well, they haven't taken the time to do good work. And that's going to affect the grade. Even if the content is solid and their research is solid, the credibility is going to affect their grade and probably trigger bias to of the reader. In the case of academics, your professor. And you can bet your professor takes his discipline or her discipline very seriously. And when they see that you're not, it triggers their bias, it offends them. So it's going to affect the grade, even if they're really objective about evaluating your work. So in addition to the things that you're mentioning, guys, I think in academics, there is that issue for sure.
It's a great
For better
point you
or
make
worse.
about cultural bias and how we should be open to the fact that obviously as all these different languages around the world, it's amazing that people communicate and write in English. In the world of professional writing, though, it's the readers, it's the editors who are the judges at the end of the day. And Pete has just told us that if you have a spelling error, if you have an error in the subtitles, it reduces our perception of the product, of like what you're producing and putting out wherever you're from. So I guess that's what it comes down to, is like how valuable is your work, is what you're writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, guys, we have some examples to share with our audience today of these specific errors that can just crush that credibility. And we're using crush as a negative here. We're not talking about crushing it like you're awesome and you're succeeding. We're talking about what's the word? We are appropriating that term and using it in the negative. You don't want your credibility crushed, folks. So why don't we kick it off with Pete? Do you have some examples to share with us?
Sure. So I wanted to talk about articles because I know how so many students struggle with articles in English. And it's also a good example of an aspect of grammar that doesn't always affect meaning, doesn't always affect clarity, but affects your presentation. Okay. The first thing is, why do so many of you struggle with articles? One big reason is because of first language interference. So when you have, for example, a language like Polish, where there just are no articles, right? Then when you write in English, it's very easy to forget them. Okay. And the other thing is that I've met students who understand articles in English, but they still make mistakes. I wanted to talk about this because this is really important, that when you have first language interference, you make mistakes in English, and this can happen even if you understand the grammar. And this is because you get unfortunately into bad habits. So once you've repeated the same mistake so many times, even though you then understand the grammar, you still keep repeating it. All right. So I wanted to talk about actually one particular student I've had who is Polish, and so he was making a lot of mistakes in his English, a lot of mistakes using articles, and it was for this reason that in Polish there just are no articles, so he just kept forgetting to use them. And he understood the rules. So I mean, I saw one or two of his pieces, and he had a lot of errors in articles. So I gave him some feedback. We talked about the rules, and he understood the rules really well. And we did an exercise, and he did the exercise really well. And then in his next piece, he still made mistakes. And what was happening was that he understood the feedback, but he wasn't doing enough practice. So I'm going to give you like a couple of examples of the types of typical errors that one that he was making, and then typical errors from another first language. Let me just share my screen here. So share this. Okay, so two typical errors. Can you see that? All right, everybody?
Yep.
Okay, so two typical errors using articles. So this was one that my Polish student was making. So he's a journalist who writes about disinformation. He's a fact checker. So he wrote, "There is no information about General Pot's engagement in war in Ukraine." Okay, so this is an example of he's missing the article. it should be, there's no information about General Potts' engagement in the war in Ukraine. Okay, so so war is singular, right? It's countable. In this case, it's a specific war, so you need the definite article the. And as I say, he understood this, but he just forgot because there are no articles in Polish. So he's got into this habit. To give you another example. Okay, so another example, and this is typical. I've seen this a lot with students whose first language is a Romance language, like Spanish, French, Italian. So they might write in English, the education is essential for personal growth. Okay. So here you shouldn't use the definite article. You shouldn't use any article. It should be education is essential for personal growth. So this is, when we talk about something in general, so then we don't usually use an article. Okay. And these are just two rules or two instances of using articles, and that there are others. And I could talk to you, of course, about different rules and stuff. But I wanted to focus more on approach, because you can get a lesson on articles anywhere, right? And as I said to you, it doesn't mean that by studying articles and understanding them, it doesn't mean that you won't keep making mistakes. So that's why the approach is really important. So yeah, what I wanted to say was, once you've had feedback, so you want to go through this process of first diagnosing, right? So you want to learn by doing. So when you write your articles, your journalistic articles, get them checked, get someone to then diagnose the errors. So someone will see, okay, look, you're making mistakes here with articles, okay? And then they'll give you feedback, so you understand, which instances of using articles you're having problems with, understand the feedback. But then it's really important after that to practice, right? So one thing is really important, that you actually correct your own errors in your article, right? So if you're like my student, he was making the same mistakes over and over again, even though he understood the correct use of articles. It doesn't then help him if I just correct his article, right? The articles in his article, right? He should actually do it himself. So what you need to be prompted. Okay, so get someone to tell you, okay, here you're missing an article, or here in this sentence you've got an article you don't need, and then you should actually correct it yourself in context, because when you do grammar in context, that is much more memorable than out of context. Okay, but then don't stop there. Actually, then do some exercises, because what's really important is awareness. If you're really actively practicing using articles correctly, you're going to be more aware. So when it then comes to writing your next article, you should actually be thinking, okay, I write my article, right? And then after I've got all the main ideas on my page, I've developed the ideas, I've put them in the right order. Okay, now I'm checking for grammar, and I'm checking especially for articles, because I know that I've been making mistakes using them. Okay. Yes, it's really mindfulness. Okay. So that's really what I wanted to focus on, is not so much the grammar itself, the rules, but the approach. Okay, so it's really write. Okay, get your writing diagnosed for the mistakes. Okay, in this case, we're talking about articles. Then get feedback, so you make sure you understand the rules. Okay, and then practice. And when you're practicing, correct your own errors prompted by a teacher. Okay, and be very aware when you're writing your next article that you're thinking about these errors that you've been making, so that you then avoid them. So it really is repetition. The more you form the new positive habits of using the articles correctly, after a while, it will become automatic. You'll do it automatically correctly rather than making the mistakes automatically that you were doing before. Okay. That's what I wanted to talk about today. And so, by the way, if you are worried about making mistakes, grammar mistakes in your articles, if you're a second language English journalist, feel free to message me. So I do have a program, and part of this program deals with these issues. Okay, so using this approach of diagnosing errors, giving feedback, detailed feedback so you understand, and then lots and lots of practice so that you get into the new positive habit of getting it right every time, and it would just become automatic so that you can then focus on enjoying your journalism, getting your message across, writing in an impactful way for your readers. All right. So that's all for me on this for now. I'm going to pass you over to who's next. So is it Phil now or Paul? Who's going next? Or any comments first?
Well, I just wanted to say, Pete, I love that you used the word approach, because it's so key to think of sort of strategies or approaches to writing. It's mindful to approach something, right? You're thinking, how should I go about it? What am I going to plan? And what do I intend to do? Then you do it, and you might check it afterwards. I think now we're in this zone of tips and tricks. Everyone wants tricks. It's like there are no tricks. If you're asking for tricks, you're the one being tricked. Like let's focus on approaches. Let's talk about strategies. So yeah, I love that.
I totally concur, and I would also add, I love the fact that Pete, you mentioned habits. A lot of what we do with coaching, especially writers, is identifying problematic habits, bringing that to the writer's attention so that they're conscious of it, and then developing and replacing those with the positive habit or the correct structural habit or linguistic habit. It's about that. And that's why I think the term coaching really is apt, because it's like coaching an athlete, identifying their bad habit, however they're using their body inadequately, and replacing it with an adjusted habit, and then practicing that over and over again so that when it's game time, it comes out naturally. And that's how you can overcome that interference. So I really like that point, Pete.
So remember, everyone, that first language writers, they don't necessarily understand the grammar, right? But they write correctly because they've just always done it that way. Right? It's become, it's second nature to them. But as second language writers, it can also become second nature to you. It's like once you've done it enough times correctly, then you stop thinking about the grammar. You just do it automatically, correctly.
I would also venture to say, Pete, that when we were children, we had some bad habits that got corrected by our teachers and our parents, right?
Good point, yeah.
So we've had that experience. Now it's just instinctual.
For sure. And
Phil?
I think just last word on this, you're talking about, children make errors. I think going back to our theme of credibility, people negatively judge these errors because we see it as childlike, don't we? It's like, you're making a basic grammar error. That's what, a 6-year-old would do in their native language. So that's where a lot of our bias, I think, comes from. And we want it to be second. Point. I love that. Second language writers, it can become second nature.
That's a great point.
Absolutely.
Just like really last word on that, what you said there, Phil. So I had a student who, and Tanya just mentioned prepositions, and he was worried about prepositions because he would make mistakes. He was, he's a digital journalist, so they would publish their articles, quickly, and sometimes there'd be mistakes in his use of prepositions. And he'd said to me that he'd had like comments where, from his audience, where he felt like he was being treated as a child.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah.
So what errors are you going to share with us, Phil?
Just sharing them now. I am going to talk to you about content writing and copywriting that most of the people I work with write. content, which is ironic because it's not always my favorite word, but they write articles and blogs and copy. And these are just some of the typical errors that I see. I don't think they relate to any specific first language users. I see them regularly. So I just thought I'd go through these pretty quickly. The first is question words. I cannot tell you how many times I see this every day on LinkedIn, on social media, is how to or when to with a question. That's not correct. I'm going to show you the correct answer in a minute. The next incorrect question or incorrectly formed question is every influencer should buy antivirus software in 2023. Not right. And do you know where can I find the best video editors? We've probably seen these errors before, committed them before, depending on our first languages. But here's why they're not correct, or how they should be formatted. So the first one, how to, if you've got a question word plus to, it's a noun clause. It's not a question. All right, so just remove that question mark. You can format it as a question, but it's more typical to have how to just as an affirmative sentence. The next one, it's syntax error. It's word order error, right? We need to put this verb first. Should every influencer buy antivirus software? And lastly, when we ask indirect questions, this can trip us up a bit, because where can I find is actually a correct formation of a question. But when we ask in an indirect way, which is very typical in British English and in polite business situations, where we don't want to be too direct and demanding, we use this form where we put a kind of tag on the front of the question, do you know? And then we put the real question, right? We want to know the information about the video editors, not whether the person knows. So the correct word order there is where I can find, right? Just as it would be in an affirmative sentence. Okay, next set of errors is one of my all-time classics, the comma splice. Comma splice is like this. It's not always picked up by AI. Certainly something I see all the time. Because of, in some languages, it's probably okay to join independent clauses with a comma, but in English, it's not. So if this is incorrect, what you'll notice is you've got subject verb, right? And then after the comma, subject verb. If you've got that, you should definitely be asking, are these both independent? Can they exist on their own, right? I finished writing the article, could be a sentence. I haven't submitted it yet, could be a sentence on its own. So that means they're independent and don't go together only with a comma. How can we solve it? 4 options. You can use a full stop. Often this is a good way to solve the problem. You get nice short sentences. They have impact. Here, maybe not, because they're very short and they both start with I. Semicolon, not my favorite, but can be useful when we are contrasting things or showing a close relationship. Solution 3 is probably the most common, right? We want a conjunction, and, but, for, so, yeah. Any of these fanboy conjunctions, that's the way I would solve this particular one. And the last one could be to reformat the sentence, right? To use a complex sentence here. So there's no one right answer for solving a comma splice. You have options that depends on the writing style, right? But definitely watch out for independent clauses connected only by a comma. Final errors that I see are with these adverbs. These are the kind of linking words, however, thus, therefore, usually, that we are told to put into our writing, especially in high school and academia. And they're used incorrectly with an adverb like however. We need a comma after it, right? We shouldn't find it on its own, sans comma, in the middle of the sentence. So the second one here, the second bullet, is correct, right? I've replaced that that comma with a semicolon to start a new independent clause and put a comma after however. Final one is when instead of using an adverb like however, that's been confused here with although, right? So although is a conjunction, and that cannot begin a sentence in the same way as however, right? It has to form part of a dependent clause, a clause which depends on what follows. So although the industry has been waiting for this solution for years, is not a complete sentence, right? We shouldn't have one clause sentences beginning with although or while. That's another typical one I see confused with however. So the fix here, you could use however, you could use a different formation for the sentence, but probably easier something like despite this, the industry has been waiting for this solution. So watch out for those three errors. Those are the three typical ones. I'm sure there are many more that you might see. My approach is probably similar to Pete's. It's holistic, right? We don't necessarily need to be studying the ins and outs of grammar and doing a huge amount of input. It's about habit. It's about taking a holistic approach. And in my courses that I run with clients, whether they're copywriters or content writers or even write something different, that's the kind of approach I take, is let's find the right system for you to recognize typical errors, to recognize problems like adverbs, like comma splices, like question words, and implement checks on your final product right before you put it out, because what matters is the final product. That's what you're selling, that's what you're publishing, that's what you're sending. I'm launching a group course in just over a week, which is very exciting. Already plenty of people signed up. It's going to be a great cohort of around 8 writers, I think. And yeah, together we're going to go through this holistic approach to fixing errors, to making your work stylish, and solving any of the problems that you may have as a freelance writer. Tough times in 2023 to stand out. So if you can polish your writing so it's highly accurate, it's free of errors, you're going to gain that credibility. If you're interested in learning more about my course, just DM me. You can find information about the course on my profile, but just send me a message saying, hey, how's it going, Phil? And I will let you know what is up with the course and whether you can still join. So please get in touch. That's it from me.
Thank you, Phil. That's very
Phil.
interesting. That comma splice looks very familiar. I see that constantly.
Yeah,
that's
I've seen some people don't think it's important, but it is. You have to think that commas, so punctuation, it's used for a reason, right? It's not only convention style, it's actually to divide your thoughts up, right? To divide your ideas. So if you have like long sentences with this comma splice, it means that you're not dividing your ideas up clearly. So that's going to affect the clarity of your work. And remember, clarity is the number one need in writing for your audience.
That's what we're after.
Yep, agree. Comma splices, watch out for them.
Watch out. Actually, going to connect something you mentioned about comma splices to something I encounter too. So if I may, I'm going to share my 3 common typical errors that I encounter. Where is it now? Right here. So I work with academic writers, high school students, college students, even professors who are publishing in journals. So credibility is very important to them. Being taken seriously as a student, believe it or not, is important because it's going to affect your grade and, more importantly, perhaps opportunities in the future. In my experience, if a professor is impressed with your writing, they kind of open the office door to you a little bit more because they see that you take their discipline seriously, the discipline that they're instructing. But as both of you guys have mentioned, it really comes down to clarity and meaning. Are you communicating the intent, the purpose, the meaning of your writing? And in the case of academic writing, are you communicating the research you've done, your knowledge of the topic, all of those things? If the writing is full of errors, it's going to erode that. It's going to crush it very, very quickly. So I want to show you a couple of errors that I see all the time. And let's look at the adjustments that we can make. Okay, actually, first one I want to look at is the misuse of conditional modals. Now, the 2 most common conditional modals are would and could. And I've even argued in my work as the grammar detective on my live stream, I've argued that every time we use would or could, you're really invoking a conditional meaning. Even something like, would you open the door for me? A polite request. For me, even that is a conditional. What makes it polite is you're giving the power to the other person to say no, right? So you're really implying the condition clause. Would you open the door, please? If you don't mind, or if you're able. So you're giving them the power to say no. Therefore, it's still hypothetical. So the basic idea of could and would is that they convey the hypothetical or unreal result that comes from a condition that you propose. I know that sounds maybe a bit too far-fetched, but the idea of could and would is that they are expressing results that are based on a condition that isn't real yet, right? So that's what you're communicating. You're communicating something that isn't real yet. We don't always want to do that. Sometimes, especially in academic writing, we want to explain or express something that is real or that is factual. Conditional modals are not how we do that. So a very common error we can see in this example over here, the first one, Tom studies in the cafe. He could not concentrate. Well, if you say Tom studies, you're using simple present verb tense, which is what we use to explain a habit, a routine, a general truth, or a scientific fact. It sounds like this is Tom's habit or his routine. He studies in the cafe every day, every evening. But when you say he could not concentrate, you are invoking the conditional. He could not concentrate under what conditions? If what? That doesn't fit the first clause, Tom studies in the cafe. So the correct way to express that would be Tom studies in the cafe. He cannot concentrate. Cannot is the simple present version using the simple modal version of could, which is can. And therefore we maintain that cohesion between verb tense. And combined, we're expressing a general truth about Tom. Every day he studies in the cafe and every day he can't concentrate. I see this error all the time. Let's look at another one. So this one says, the molecules are usually combined, comma, which would create the acid. Now, again, the molecules are usually combined, right? Usually is expressing the idea that it's a routine or a general truth. Would, which would create the acid, is invoking the conditional, the hypothetical or unreal condition that results in the acid. Well, that's not what we're saying here. We're saying molecules are usually combined and they usually create the acid. That's a scientific general truth or fact. So the correct way to express that is the molecules are usually combined, which creates the acid. Not under specific conditions, but when they're combined, every time acid is created. So this use of could and would, when you don't mean a conditional, I see this all the time, guys. People get this confused, right? They're confusing a hypothetical, unreal possibility with a common or general truth. So if you want to express something that is generally true or specifically scientifically factual, you've got to use simple present. For example, if we're talking about water freezing at 0 degrees, well, that's always the case. If it's always the case, it's not a habit or routine. Well, it's nature's habit. Nature always freezes water at 0 degrees. So we've got to use simple present. Very common error. Another one I see all the time, and I want to connect this back to something said earlier, is fragments. Fragments they can be subordinate clauses. They could be just a noun phrase or a verb phrase. But as Phil said earlier, an independent clause is a clause that can be expressed on its own. And some genres of writing, fragments are fine, like creative writing, content writing. In fact, when I write fiction, I use fragments a lot. But in academic writing, I have a little test. I call it the bus stop test. I tell my writers, you should be able to take any single sentence out of your writing, take it out and put it on the board or put it on another paper alone, and it should be completely comprehensible. Or the bus stop test is, imagine walking up to a stranger at the bus stop and uttering that sentence. Will they understand you? So in our example here, we have the villagers had to flee, period. The next sentence is because the Mongols attacked the bridge. Let's do the bus stop test. Can I walk up to the lady at the bus stop and say, excuse me, because the Mongols attacked the bridge? She's going to say, because the Mongols attacked the bridge, what? It has a subject, it has a verb, but it's not a complete and independent idea. So it does not pass the bus stop test. I can't take that out of the paragraph and let it sit independently with a fully comprehensible meaning. Can't do it. So in academic writing, we can't get away with a fragment like that. It's a fragment because it's a dependent clause. It depends on an independent clause. The villagers had to flee. So we've got to combine them and say the villagers had to flee because the Mongols attacked the bridge. Now we've got a larger sentence and it's a complete meaning. And the fragment is no longer isolated. Okay? And the other example, we have maybe an even more egregious fragment because this one doesn't even have a subject and verb structure. The government has several options, period. For example, raising taxes. So can you extract, for example, raising taxes and put it on its own, and is it completely comprehensible? Can I walk up to the lady at the bus stop or the old gentleman and say, excuse me, sir, for example, raising taxes? He's going to look at me with ziggy eyes and he's going to say, for example of what? You're introducing an example, but there's no exemplar. So what the heck are we saying here? That doesn't pass the bus stop test. It's a fragment. It's a piece of an idea. So it has to combine with the independent clause. The government has several options, comma, for example, raising taxes. Actually, that sentence is incomplete. There should be, for example, raising taxes. It's too late to change it. Sorry, my bad. It should say, for example, raising taxes. But that, for example, introducing the example, raising taxes, a noun phrase, you can't just utter a noun phrase on its own. The people at the bus stop will not understand you. And therefore, it can't exist on its own as a sentence with a capital letter and ending with a full stop. Can't do it. Certainly not in academic writing, but you might see that in literature or fiction or even content writing. Okay, The last one is an extremely common error, and I think it's probably the one I encounter that hurts credibility the most, because it's common to certain language groups, and therefore it can trigger unconscious or even conscious bias, okay? And we want to avoid it. It's an unfortunate reality of academics, of reader-writer relationships, I think. And that is for plus verb. Now, a lot of students and writers struggle with prepositions. I host a weekly grammar live stream, and one of the questions I'm asked all the time is explain prepositions. And I always start with the same thing. I remind my readers, my writers, my learners, my live stream viewers, look, preposition has one job to do. It exists to connect nouns. Now, it connects nouns to other parts of the sentence, so verbs, adjectives, other things, but it belongs to the noun, right? It connects nouns to their relationship with the rest of the idea. And the prefix pre in preposition means it comes before the position of the noun. But in some languages, the preposition for works with a verb. It's not the case in English. In fact, this for plus verb structure does not exist in English. It's completely impossible according to the logic and syntax of English. So if you can just remember that, it's impossible. It's so elementary, it becomes really a shocking and sort of outstanding error that can really hurt and crush your credibility. So let's look at some examples. First one, the initial conversations were held for plan the strategy. For is a preposition, plan is a verb, right? Can't have it. Doesn't exist in English. A lot of writers get the for plus verb confused with the English infinitive verb, to plus verb. And that's one of these weird exceptions and irregularities in English where to isn't used as a preposition. It's used as part of the verb, the infinitive verb. Not so with for. So this should be the initial conversations were held. Why? To plan the strategy. So we can use the infinitive verb to connect the reason the conversations were held. Not for plus verb. It's just not possible. And the other example, we must consider what is essential for eliminate so we can develop. Again, we have for plus a verb eliminate. Can't do it. It has to be, we must consider what is essential to eliminate, right? So we can develop whatever develop they're talking about. So when I have a writer who has this error, I make a point of writing a little note for them or encouraging them to make a little graphic poster and stick it on their wall. For plus verb is just impossible in English. It doesn't exist. And English grammar has a lot of irregularities. There's a lot of rules and exceptions and twists and turns. This is not one of them. This is 100% rule you can actually hold on to and build a new habit on. Anytime a student has the impulse to say for plus verb, I say just automatically replace it with the infinitive. The chances of it being accurate are 99% better than if you use for plus verb, because for plus verb doesn't exist. And when a reader sees that in your writing, right away it crushes your credibility. It really does, because they know it's such an elementary error. Now, prepositions in the broader sense, it's a big challenge, I know. But this is one you can grab onto and you can really amend. You can really amend this one. So those are my three errors that crush credibility. And I would suggest to students to pay attention to them. When I work with students, the approach I use, Pete, in the framework you are offering, my approach is to identify those errors for them, even if it's constant, almost like nagging them until they're so tired of being nagged and annoyed, they adjust it for themselves. And maybe they hear my voice in their head when they're writing, oh, what would Paul say? He's going to tell me for plus verb doesn't exist. And then they amend it and stop doing that and develop the new habit. By the way, if anyone wants to work with me, if you're in the process of going through academics, college, university, graduate school, anything, DM me. I'm happy to work with students all over the world to improve their academic writing. Or if you write essays for a blog, I help those kind of writers too. So just DM me. I'm all over Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all of that stuff. And we'll put our links to all of our stuff in the description box of the recording, won't we, guys? That's all I have.
Thanks, Paul. Hey, that example with the for plus verb, that error. So it was initial conversations were held for plan, right? That Phil will relate to this too. We both live in Spanish-speaking countries. It's a typical first language interference from Spanish speakers. So one little tip would be very careful when you're translating grammatical structures from your first language to English, because it's a sure way to develop these bad habits of getting the wrong structure.
Yeah, the languages don't correspond directly one-to-one, do they?
Exactly.
I really like the way you described prepositions with the pre and the connecting to nouns. I've not heard it explained that way before. It's got a real gift for simplifying grammar. And so, yeah, nice job on that. And just added into the chat a useful tool that I recommend. It is a site where you can plug in prepositions and verbs and see which ones go together. And that is a good way just to train and learn. But yeah, I'd reiterate what Pete and Paul both said about it's about being conscious of errors and about doing it yourself. Right? There's no point sort of looking in a book and memorizing things. It's about doing it yourself and learning those prepositions bit by bit. But yeah, I totally appreciate the difficulty, because sometimes they're just different, right? Between languages. In Spanish, you might use por, and in English, you might use by, which is, well, that's not a great example because por can be two things, but sometimes in languages they're just different, right? They just use it a different one.
What do you guys think about when your writers ask you, well, why should I be mindful of grammar when I can just plug Grammarly or other sort of AI generated checkers? Even Google has one. How do you account for that?
Grammarly can make mistakes too, right? So you don't want to depend on an app that can also make mistakes. Be one thing.
Totally. I'd say we're reaching crisis point of writing machines, right? We're writers, and if you do mechanical things, they have no value because ChatGPT and Grammarly can do that. What we need to be doing as writers is focusing on the expertise of input. And I don't mean prompts. I don't mean ChatGPT prompts. I mean, how do we understand deeply the language and the content that we put together? That is our intention for the reader. That goes together. Yes, the machine can do some of the checking. It can do some of the creation, even in a mechanical sense. But if you can't do those things, if you don't understand what's going in to the machine, then your value as a writer in 2023 is much, much lower, and you're in a danger zone. So that's why, learning grammar and learning the elements of sentences and how words connect together in English is crucial for any writer, be them native speaker or not.
I would also say that. Go ahead, Pete.
Just really quick. So use AI as an assistant. So don't use AI to do the work for you. Use it just to assist you. That would be in a nutshell.
I would also say that, writing is a process of expressing your ideas in whatever form it takes. And ultimately, it's your ideas you're trying to communicate. And if you can't control your language to the point where you can communicate your idea, I'm not sure you can actually mean the idea. Does it make sense? Like, if there's a connection between language and thinking, and you're relying on AI to fix your sentence, then maybe your initial idea was flawed. So I don't know. I think there's a connection there that might be eroded by depending on grammar checkers, because grammar is just structure for an idea. So I'm very what's the word? Leery? Wary. Very wary of AI with my writers, for sure.
Maybe that was a Freudian slip.
I think so.
Saying you're weary. We're near the end of our show, aren't we? We're running out of time. But have we got any questions or any comments that we can get to? We might have to get back to a few people because, as I say, we're running down on time. But maybe there's a couple that we can chat about quickly.
Yeah, let's see here. Guys, do you have any questions out there? Let's see.
I did see one question, Paul, about I saw one question, Paul, about cannot. Should it be one word or
where is
two?
that now? Cannot, not cannot. What do you think? I've seen debate about this. Well, I've seen both.
Yeah, go ahead.
And can't, of course. I think this one's simple. The contraction is a little bit more informal in its use. We use it in speech. But as far as this little controversy, what do you guys prefer or favor in the UK?
I think together is more common.
Yeah,
and
I would agree.
But I also looked into this debate, and I believe that both are accepted. But yeah, like do what's most common. So I would use cannot together in the long form, and then if you use the contraction, it depends how formal you want to be. So if you want to be less formal, use the contraction.
I see in Canada, Canada's kind of stuck between the UK system and conventions and the American. To be honest with you, I actually prefer separating the words because can is a modal, not is the negative, and following that is going to be the verb, right? Like I cannot understand. And I like to have that distinction of isolating the modal can, because we don't merge other modals unless we do the contraction. We don't say should not. Should not is not a compound noun or word. So I like just piecing them out. However, having said that, the cannot, the first example, is widely used here. So I let my students choose and just remind them to be consistent with its use in whatever piece they're writing. We have another question here, I think.
Good point. I think that mystery has been solved. We had a few more questions about prepositions, I think, but
yeah. There's also one from Guy. He has one. He says, "I've read recently. I have never." Oh yeah, you got it up there. Well done, Paul. Yeah. I read recently. I have never spoken a word in my school, even when I tried with all my might. Can you explain the last sentence? So I'm not sure if you mean there explain what it means or explain the grammar. In terms of what it means, even when I tried with all my might, so even when I tried as hard as I could, right? But that's an interesting one in terms of what Paul was talking about in terms of fragments. So that last one's a fragment, right? Even when I tried with all my might. So depending on if this is more formal academic writing, you shouldn't have that as a fragment. It should be that even when that introduces a dependent clause, so it should be joined onto a main clause. But it would be acceptable, as we talked about before, in less formal writing. Okay, so could be used in fiction, content writing, copywriting. Sometimes in journalism, it's acceptable.
Yeah, it's the problem of fragments.
Nothing to add on that one. You nailed it, Pete.
Absolutely. One thing I think also might add to confusion with that fragment is the use of the word might. A lot of learners are familiar with might as a modal, like it might rain. Here it's actually the noun, meaning strength or power, with all of my strength, right?
Good point.
That could be a piece of the confusion as well. We have a question from Eunice. Sometimes I don't know whether a word is acting as a preposition or as part of a phrasal verb. I used to do and I'm used to it. So in the first example, I used to do, that's infinitive verb, to do. To plus verb, that's infinitive verb. And the second one is I'm used to it. That's a classic preposition. To, preposition. It is the noun, right? As I said before, the prepositions always precede the noun. We can learn prepositions in relation to an adjective. For example, earlier I saw opposite to and opposite of, but I guarantee you what comes right after to and of is a noun, right? We can learn the use of prepositions with phrasal verbs or even phrasal adjectives, but in the end, that preposition is going to be followed with a noun. So the phrasal verbs, for example, we can think of 1,000 of them, right? Like turn on, turn off, get up, get down. There's going to be nouns after that, or noun phrases, or gerunds, or any noun form.
Those are actually two very different uses of used to. They're two different structures with very different meanings. So
that's right.
You know, the first one you've got, I used to do. So you're talking about something in the past that you did repeated times, right? And the other one, I'm used to it, means I am accustomed to it.
That's right.
So yeah, those are very often confused. So be careful with those. They're two very different structures with two very different meanings.
When you look at the first one, I used to do, like I used to swim, I used to play, you're talking about an action in the past that you used to do. The second one is used to something, a noun, a thing that you're familiar with. You're right, Pete, they're very different meanings and a very similar grammatical structure, right? Very confusing.
I just added, Paul. Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that, because I don't know if Eunice could see that. I typed it on LinkedIn. This very useful site, which is you paste in some text, a sentence, and it will identify in color code parts of speech. So you immediately see what's a noun, what's a preposition, what's an adjective. And that can help you decide, like, how is that preposition being used? Well, hey, it's before a noun or it's before a verb. So that can help explain things with these short words as well, I think. So check that one out. I really recommend it.
Great website, great tool. I think you introduced that in a previous podcast, right?
That's right, yeah. That was the grammar chat we did a month ago or so.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we're coming to the end. If you do have more questions, we can always get back to you later. So just leave them in the comments. All right. Any last words, guys?
Great to be together again. Again, great to be talking about our favorite topic.
It's been a blast. Season 2 has kicked off very nicely, and we'll be back sometime next month with another episode, I guess. Mm-hmm. So keep your eyes on wherever you find out information about us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
All right.
So all right,
thanks
guys.
Everyone for attending.
Thanks a lot, and we'll see you soon, right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cheers, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.